My name is Carmen, and I turned 18 last month. The day that was supposed to celebrate my entry into adulthood turned into a nightmare I never saw coming. 5 years ago, I lost my father suddenly to what I was told was a rare illness. 6 months later, my mother married his best friend Richard. I always felt something was off about their relationship, especially how quickly they got together after Dad died. But nothing prepared me for what I discovered on my birthday night. The champagne toast my mother prepared wasn't meant to celebrate my life. It was meant to end it. Let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to hear how I uncovered a murder plot 5 years in the making. I grew up in a beautiful colonial home in Westchester County, New York, with large oak trees lining our driveway. Until I was 13, my life felt like something out of a storybook. My father, Dr. Thomas Marshall, was a brilliant medical researcher specializing in autoimmune disorders. He was tall with kind brown eyes that crinkled when he laughed, which was often. He always made time for me despite his demanding schedule. Every Saturday morning, Dad would wake me up at dawn for our special fishing trips to Cedar Lake. He taught me how to bait hooks, cast lines, and most importantly, how to sit quietly and appreciate the world around us. Those peaceful mornings on the water were when we had our most meaningful talks. He would explain complicated medical concepts to me in ways I could understand, fostering my love for science from an early age. Carmen, the human body is the most complex machine ever created. He would say, eyes bright with passion. Every system works together in perfect harmony, and when you understand that harmony, you can help restore it when something goes wrong. Dad set up a small laboratory in our basement where we conducted simple experiments together. By the time I was 12, I could identify cells under a microscope and explain basic biology concepts to my classmates. Everyone assumed I would follow in his footsteps and become a doctor. My mother, Diana, was beautiful and poised, always dressed immaculately, even for casual events. She served on multiple charity boards and hosted elaborate dinner parties that were the talk of our social circle. While Dad and I connected through science and nature, Mum and I bonded over books and art. She would take me to museums in the city and encourage my creative writing, but there was always something reserved about her affection, as if she was holding part of herself back. Richard Weber had been in my life for as long as I could remember. He and my father had met in medical school and eventually opened a practice together. Richard specialized in experimental pharmacology, while my father focused on diagnosis and treatment. They complemented each other professionally and were inseparable friends. Richard was at every holiday gathering, family vacation, and milestone celebration. He was charismatic in a way my father wasn't always ready with a witty comment or charming story. Where Dad was thoughtful and measured, Richard was bold and commanding. He brought expensive gifts for my birthdays, and Christmas always making a show of his generosity. I remember one particular summer vacation to Lake George when I was 11. The adults had been drinking wine around the fire pit while I pretended to read nearby. I noticed Richard place his hand on my mother's lower back when my father went inside to get more drinks. It lingered there too long, and the way my mother leaned into his touch momentarily before stepping away confused me. I dismissed it then, but that memory would resurface years later with new significance. Our neighborhood was filled with successful families, but we stood out because of my parents' prominence in the medical field. I attended Westchester Academy, an elite private school where I maintained excellent grades and participated in science competitions. My best friend Zoe and I were inseparable, spending weekends conducting our own research projects and dreaming about medical breakthroughs we would make someday. Looking back, there were subtle tensions in our household that I failed to fully comprehend. Sometimes I would walk into rooms where my parents had clearly been arguing, the air still charged with unspoken words. My mother would often look at my father with an expression I now recognize as disappointment, perhaps even resentment. Dad worked long hours and Mum complained about being left alone to maintain our social obligations. Richard was always there to fill the gaps. He would escort my mother to charity events when Dad was working late. He remembered details about her preferences that sometimes my father overlooked. I once overheard him say to her, "Diana, you deserve so much more than this," when they thought I was upstairs doing homework. If only I had understood then what I know now. The happy family I thought we were had cracks forming beneath the surface long before everything shattered. But at 13, all I knew was that I adored my father, respected my mother, and saw Richard as a beloved uncle figure who completed our family circle. I never imagined that in less than a year my father would be gone, my mother would be married to Richard, and the first seeds of suspicion would be planted in my mind about what really happened to the man who taught me to fish in the quiet dawn light of Cedar Lake. The morning Dad first showed symptoms remains crystal clear in my memory. It was a Tuesday in October and the fall colours were at their peak. I came down for breakfast to find him leaning against the kitchen counter. His coffee mug shattered on the floor, dark liquid spreading across the white tiles. "Dad?" I asked, fear instantly tightening my chest. "Just got dizzy for a moment, Kami. Nothing to worry about." His smile was strained and his normally healthy complexion had a greyish tint. Mum insisted he see a doctor that day. By evening, he was admitted to Westchester Medical Centre with unexplained neurological symptoms. The attending physician, Dr. Patel, ordered a battery of tests while colleagues from various specialties consulted on his case. I spent hours in uncomfortable hospital chairs watching nurses and doctors come and go from his room. Dad maintained his optimism, joking with the nurses and assuring me this was just a little blip in his health. But I saw how his hands trembled even when resting and how each day brought new symptoms: vision disturbances, muscle weakness, occasional confusion. After a week of inconclusive tests, Richard stepped in to take over my father's care. Thomas needs someone who knows his medical history intimately. He explained to my mother and me in the hospital cafeteria. "The doctors here are excellent, but they don't have our 15 years of partnership to inform their decisions." What struck me as odd was my mother's reaction. While I felt immediate relief that Dad would have his best friend and colleague overseeing his treatment, Mum seemed almost resigned, nodding silently with an expression I couldn't read. Later that night, I found her in the kitchen staring at a glass of wine, not drinking, just staring. "Mum, are you okay?" I asked. She startled slightly. "Of course, darling. Just tired from all these hospital visits." Thank goodness Richard is taking charge now. He will know what to do. As Dad's condition worsened, Richard moved him to their private clinic for what he called specialised treatment protocols. Visits became more restricted, with Richard citing infection control and the experimental nature of the treatments. I was allowed to see Dad only 3 times a week for short periods. During one visit, a nurse named Sandra was adjusting Dad's four when Richard was called away for a phone call. She glanced at the door before leaning close to me. "Your dad's symptoms don't match the diagnosis in his chart," she whispered. "I worked in toxicology for 10 years before coming here. This looks like something else entirely." Before she could elaborate, Richard returned and Sandra quickly resumed her professional demeanour. When I tried to find her on my next visit, I was told she no longer worked at the clinic. 2 months after his initial collapse, Dad had a rare moment of clarity during one of my visits. Richard had stepped out and we were alone. Dad's once strong frame had withered and his eyes had a yellowish tint. "Carmen," he said, his voice barely audible, "promise me you'll look through my research notes in the safe behind the family portrait. The combination is your birthday." "Dad, what are you talking about?" "You're going to get better and show me yourself," I insisted, fighting back tears. "Some things don't add up, sweetheart. Richard's treatments." He trailed off as footsteps approached, then squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Trust your instincts, always." That was our last real conversation. The next day, he slipped into a coma. 3 days later, Richard informed us that Dad had developed multiple organ failure due to an aggressive autoimmune response that attacked his own tissues. He died that night while I was asleep at home. Richard had convinced my mother it would be better if I wasn't there for the end. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and sympathetic murmurs. Richard delivered a moving eulogy about their friendship and partnership, his voice breaking at all the right moments. He stood beside my mother, his arm protectively around her shoulders as mourners filed past to offer condolences. A week after the funeral, I remembered Dad's final request and snuck into his study while Mum was meeting with the family attorney. The safe contained research journals, financial documents, and a USB drive. I quickly copied everything and returned the originals before anyone noticed. Later that night, I reviewed the files and found something disturbing. Dad had been investigating adverse reactions to an experimental drug compound that Richard had been developing. The notes detailed his concerns that the compound could cause neurological damage and organ failure when administered in certain combinations. The symptoms described matched Dad's illness perfectly. More troubling was a separate document where Dad had logged unusual lab results from his own blood work. He noted unexplained presence of compounds that shouldn't have been there with question marks and the initials RW beside several entries. I also found medical records that contradicted the official cause of death. While Richard had reported an autoimmune disorder, these records suggested toxic accumulation consistent with prolonged exposure to pharmaceutical compounds. I hid the USB drive in a hollowed-out copy of Gray's Anatomy, that Dad had given me for my 13th birthday, unsure what to do with this information, but certain I needed to keep it secret. My suspicions were like a small dark seed planted in fertile ground, ready to grow into something I could barely imagine. 6 months after we buried my father, my mother called me into the living room for what she called an important family discussion. Richard sat beside her on the sofa, their hands clasped together on her knee. I knew immediately what they were going to say, but the reality still hit me like a physical blow. Carmen, Richard and I have decided to get married. Mom announced, a nervous smile playing at her lips. We've found comfort in each other during this difficult time, and we realize life is too short to deny our feelings. Their feelings. As if my father had been nothing but an inconvenient obstacle to their happiness. I stared at them, unable to form words, as Richard spoke about how he would never try to replace my father, but hoped to be a supportive presence in our lives. When's the wedding? I finally managed to ask, my voice hollow. Next month. Small ceremony, just close friends and family. Mum replied, relief evident in her tone at my apparent acceptance. That night I called my grandmother, Dad's mother, and broke down completely. Grandma Margaret was the only person who seemed as disturbed by the hasty engagement as I was. It's not right, Carmen, she said, her voice crackling over the phone line. Thomas isn't even cold in his grave. There was always something about the way Diana looked at Richard that bothered me even years ago. The wedding took place at our country club on a perfect spring day. I wore a pale blue dress and stood beside my mother as her maid of honor, a role I accepted only after considerable pressure. Throughout the ceremony, I clutched a small photo of Dad in my bouquet, hidden from view, but pressing against my palm as a silent act of loyalty. Many family friends declined to attend, finding the quick remarriage distasteful. Those who came cast sidelong glances at me, their eyes filled with pity. My father's sister left immediately after the ceremony, pulling me aside first to whisper, "This isn't what Thomas would have wanted. Stay strong and call me any time." Richard moved into our home the next day, and subtle changes began immediately. Family photos featuring my father were gradually relocated from prominent positions to hallways, then to closets. Dad's study was repurposed as Richard's home office, his medical books and personal items packed away in boxes that were stored in the attic. "We need to move forward, Carmen," Mum would say whenever I objected to these changes. "Living in the past isn't healthy for any of us." The summer after the wedding, I was introduced to Ashley, Richard's 19-year-old daughter from his first marriage. She arrived with 3 suitcases and a wary expression, her dark hair cut in a severe bob that framed suspicious eyes. "Dad said you might be difficult," were the first words she spoke to me when we were alone. "Said you're having trouble accepting the new family dynamic." "And what about you?" I asked. "Are you accepting it?" A shadow crossed her face. "I learned long ago that what Dad wants, Dad gets, one way or another." Ashley and I formed an uneasy alliance over the next few weeks. She told me her mother had died when she was 12, under circumstances that were never fully explained to her. "Some kind of accident at home," she said. "Dad doesn't like talking about it." Our house transformed under Richard's influence. New furniture replaced pieces my parents had chosen together. The kitchen was remodeled according to his preferences. My mother's wardrobe evolved to reflect his tastes rather than hers. More concerning was our growing isolation. Invitations to my grandmother and aunts were repeatedly declined or forgotten to be sent. My mother's old friends gradually stopped calling after being treated coldly by Richard. Even my school friends found reasons not to visit, uncomfortable with the watchful way Richard monitored our conversations. My grades began to slip as I struggled to concentrate. When my science teacher, Mr. Keller, expressed concern, Richard suggested I transfer to a less demanding school. "The academic pressure is clearly too much for Carmen right now," he told my mother. "She needs a gentler environment while she processes her grief." But it wasn't grief affecting my performance. It was fear and suspicion. Late at night, I would sneak into the attic to look through Dad's belongings, searching for additional clues. Many of his personal papers and medical records had mysteriously disappeared. The research journals I had seen in the safe were nowhere to be found. When I asked my mother about the missing items, she appeared genuinely confused. Richard packed everything. He said he was storing the sensitive medical documents at their clinic for safekeeping. One night, I overheard Ashley on the phone in her room, her voice urgent but hushed. "I'm telling you, it's happening again," she was saying. "The same patterns, the same control, the same isolation. I don't know what to do." When I confronted her later, She denied the conversation had been about us, but her eyes held fear I recognized in myself. We began keeping a shared journal documenting strange occurrences and conversations, hiding it in a loose vent in the laundry room where neither parent ever went. The more Richard settled into our lives, the more I felt my father's presence being systematically erased, not just from our home, but from our memories. And with each passing day, the seed of suspicion my father had planted with his dying words grew stronger, nourished by new questions that had no innocent answers. By my 16th birthday, the comfortable family home I once knew had transformed into a place of constant vigilance and hidden agendas. I had spent nearly 3 years gathering fragments of evidence, documenting inconsistencies, and forming a troubling picture of what might have really happened to my father. Ashley had become my unexpected ally. Despite our initial wariness, we bonded over our shared suspicions about Richard. One night, she confided something that sent chills through me. "Before my mother died, she was keeping notes too," Ashley whispered as we sat in my room with music playing to mask our conversation. "She thought Dad was tampering with her medication. I found her journal after she died, but Dad caught me reading it and burned it. He said she had become paranoid and delusional toward the end." This revelation sparked a new direction in my investigation. Using the school library computers to avoid leaving digital traces at home, I researched poisoning methods that could mimic autoimmune disorders. The results were disturbing. Certain compounds administered gradually over time could cause symptoms identical to those my father experienced, culminating in the multiple organ failure that ultimately killed him. Ashley and I developed a system for communicating our findings. We left coded messages and shared books, developed hand signals to warn each other when Richard was in suspicious moods, and created excuses to leave the house separately so one could keep watch while the other investigated. Through careful eavesdropping and occasional access to Richard's home office, when he was away, we pieced together a timeline. My mother and Richard appeared to have been involved romantically for at least a year before my father's death. Email printouts I found hidden in my mother's jewelry box contained veiled references to their future together, dating back to when my father was still healthy. More damning were the financial documents Ashley discovered while searching for her birth certificate in Richard's files. My father had a substantial life insurance policy that paid out triple for accidental death. There were also documents showing that Richard's experimental drug research was about to lose funding due to safety concerns raised by my father. "Dad was nearly bankrupt before your father died," Ashley told me. "The clinic was hemorrhaging money because they couldn't get FDA approval for their new compounds. Now look at them." Indeed, my mother and Richard had recently purchased a vacation home in the Hamptons and were discussing opening a new medical facility in Manhattan. Their sudden financial comfort and income had never struck me as odd until Ashley pointed it out. As I gathered evidence, I began experiencing a series of strange accidents. My bicycle brakes failed while I was riding downhill, sending me into a ditch that left me with a broken arm. Food that only I ate would leave me violently ill. Twice I found the gas stove in the kitchen left on when I returned home from school. "They're testing methods," Ashley whispered one night, while helping me research untraceable poisons. "Just like they did with your dad, just like with my mom, our freedom became increasingly restricted." Richard insisted on driving me to and from school, citing safety concerns after my accident. My mother began checking my room regularly, claiming she was looking for dirty laundry, but clearly searching for something else. I kept my most important evidence with Ms. Thompson, my English teacher, who had noticed my withdrawal and fear. Without revealing the full extent of my suspicions, I had confided that I felt unsafe at home and needed someone to keep documents for me. She provided a secure location in her classroom filing cabinet and promised not to look at the contents. The summer before my senior year, my grandmother Margaret died unexpectedly. She had been in perfect health, active in her community, and had recently begun asking pointed questions about my father's medical records, which she had a right to request as his next of kin. "Heart attack," Richard announced when he delivered the news. "Very sudden, nothing could be done." I locked myself in the bathroom and cried for hours, not just from grief, but from terror. The walls were closing in. The last person who might have helped uncover the truth about my father was gone. When I finally composed myself and emerged, I overheard Richard speaking to someone on the phone in his office. "The grandmother situation is resolved," he was saying quietly. "Yes, same method, untraceable. The girl is still a problem, but we have plans for that too. After she turns 18, the trust fund transfers to Diana's control if Carmen is unavailable." I hadn't even known about a trust fund. That night, I snuck into Richard's office and found documents showing that my father had established a trust of $5 million for me, accessible when I turned 25, or reverted to my mother if I died before then. My hands shook as I carefully replaced the papers. I was no longer investigating past crimes. I was trying to prevent my own murder. I made contact with Dr. James Levine, my father's colleague from Johns Hopkins, who had always been suspicious of the circumstances surrounding Dad's death. We met at a coffee shop during a school field trip to Baltimore, where I shared what I had discovered. "This is extraordinarily serious, Carmen," Dr. Levine said, his face grave. "But proving medical murder is nearly impossible without exhumation and very specific tests that may no longer be viable after this much time." He gave me his card with his personal cell number written on the back. "Call me anytime, day or night. And Carmen, be extremely careful. People capable of what you're describing won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens them." 2 weeks later, Richard discovered one of my research notebooks hidden in my mattress. He confronted me in my bedroom, his typically charming demeanor replaced with cold fury. "Playing Detective Carmen, did you think I wouldn't notice your little investigation?" He held up the notebook, flipping through pages of timelines and symptom research. "Your father died of a documented medical condition. Your continued obsession with conspiracy theories is concerning." His eyes, usually warm and engaging when others were present, were flat and reptilian as he leaned close to me. "This behavior stops now. Your mother and I are concerned about your mental health. Perhaps you need residential treatment." The threat was clear. If I continued, I would be labeled unstable and institutionalized, giving them complete control over my fate and my father's trust fund. I nodded meekly, tears streaming down my face in what Richard surely interpreted as submission. In reality, they were tears of determination. I had less than 6 months until my 18th birthday, when I could legally leave. I needed to survive until then, gather my final evidence, and escape with Ashley. But Richard and my mother had other plans that would come to fruition sooner than I anticipated, centered around the elaborate 18th birthday party they insisted on throwing for me. As May approached, and with it my 18th birthday, my mother launched into party planning mode with an intensity that seemed excessive even by her standards. She insisted on a lavish celebration at our country club with over 100 guests, including Richard's medical colleagues, local politicians, and society friends my mother had cultivated since her marriage. "But Mom, I don't want a big party," I protested during a tense breakfast. "I'd prefer something small with just a few friends." "Nonsense, Carmen," she replied, not looking up from her party planning binder. 18 is a milestone. We need to mark it appropriately." Richard nodded in agreement. "Your mother has put tremendous effort into planning this, Carmen. It's important to maintain our social standing in the community. Besides, it will be good for you to have something positive to focus on instead of your unusual interests." The implied threat in his words was clear. Since discovering my notebook, Richard had been watching me closely, checking my room regularly, and monitoring my computer use. I had been careful to appear compliant and uninterested in further investigation, but maintaining the facade was exhausting. The guest list notably excluded any of my father's relatives or old friends. When I suggested inviting my Aunt Catherine, my father's sister, my mother dismissed the idea immediately. "She never approved of my remarriage," Mum said sharply. "She would only cast a shadow over the celebration." What struck me as particularly odd was their insistence on specific elements of the party that seemed arbitrary, but which they refused to compromise on. The party had to be held in the East Garden of the country club, not the more popular West Terrace. The colour scheme had to include particular shades of blue and silver, and most strangely, they were adamant about serving a traditional family champagne toast with an old recipe Richard claimed was from his European ancestry. "It's how we celebrated Ashley's 18th, Richard explained. "A special blend I prepare myself. It's a Weber family tradition now, and you're part of this family." Ashley pulled me aside after that conversation, her face pale. "Carmen, my 18th birthday was when I got really sick," she whispered urgently. "I was hospitalized for 3 days afterward. They said it was alcohol poisoning, but I barely drank anything except Dad's special toast. A week before the party, I was accepted to Columbia University with a pre-med scholarship, my ticket to escape in the fall. I kept the acceptance letter hidden in my locker at school, showing my parents only the waitlist notification from Stanford, which had been my public first choice. Their relief at my apparent setback was poorly concealed. "Don't worry, sweetheart," Richard said, patting my hand condescendingly. "Many students benefit from a gap year. You can work at the clinic with me and reapply next year. The thought of being trapped at Richard's clinic for a year, vulnerable to whatever they might plan, sent panic through me. I contacted Dr. Levine, immediately updating him on my situation and my growing certainty that my birthday party was designed as the setting for my accident. "We need hard evidence, Carmen," he reminded me. "Without it, these are just suspicions, however well-founded." 3 days before the party, Ashley disappeared. She had gone out to run errands and never returned. My mother and Richard reported her missing to the police, playing the role of concerned parents perfectly. Richard suggested she had probably gone off with a boyfriend they didn't know about. "Ashley has always been rebellious," he told the detective with a convincing sigh. "She disappears occasionally when she wants attention." That night, my phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. "Don't eat or drink anything at party. Evidence in cabin safe. Code 051203. Getting help. Stay alive. A." The cabin was Richard's hunting lodge in the Catskills, a place he occasionally took business associates. I had no way to get there before the party, but knowing Ashley was alive and working on her end of our plan gave me hope. The day before my birthday, I met with my school counsellor, Ms. Winters, and gave her a sealed envelope. "If anything happens to me at my party tomorrow, please give this to the police," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's probably nothing, just me being dramatic, but just in case." The envelope contained copies of my evidence, a timeline of suspicious events, and contact information for Dr. Levine and my father's sister, Catherine, Ms. Winters looked concerned but agreed to keep the envelope sealed in her desk. That night, I packed a small emergency bag with essential documents, some cash I'd been saving, and a change of clothes, hiding it in the garden shed where I could grab it quickly if needed. I also set up my phone to record continuously during the party, hoping to capture incriminating conversations. As I lay in bed unable to sleep, I thought about my father and the warning in his eyes during our last lucid conversation. I thought about Ashley somewhere out there fighting for both of us. And I thought about the party tomorrow, where I would either find the final evidence I needed or become the next victim in a pattern that had already claimed too many lives. The morning of my 18th birthday dawned bright and clear, a perfect May day that belied the darkness I felt surrounding me. My mother entered my room with a breakfast tray and a too bright smile. "Happy birthday, darling." She exclaimed, setting down a plate of my favourite blueberry pancakes and a glass of orange juice. A special breakfast for my adult daughter. I noticed her watching intently as I lifted the juice, and remembering Ashley's warning, I pretended to take a sip while actually letting nothing pass my lips. "Thanks, Mum. It looks delicious." "You should eat up," she insisted. "It's going to be a long day." I pushed the food around, claiming excitement had ruined my appetite. My mother's smile faltered slightly before she composed herself. "Richard has a special vitamin supplement for you. He says it will help with your energy today." The small blue pill she offered looked innocuous, but after she left, I flushed it down the toilet. Whatever they had planned, it seemed to involve multiple approaches. The party preparations were elaborate. Florists, caterers, and decorators swarmed our house and the country club grounds. My mother had selected a silver dress for me that looked beautiful, but was oddly formal, more appropriate for a memorial service than a birthday celebration. I wondered grimly if that was intentional. As I was getting ready, I sent a text to James, my lab partner, and one of the few friends I still trusted. "Remember what we discussed. Party starts at 6. Be ready." James had agreed to help me record conversations and watch the drinks, particularly whatever special toast Richard was preparing. The country club's east garden was transformed with thousands of twinkling lights and elaborate floral arrangements. A string quartet played softly as guests began arriving at 6. I stood with my mother and Richard in a reception line, accepting congratulations and gifts, with a smile that made my face ache. "You look positively radiant," Richard said. For the benefit of nearby guests, his hand gripping my shoulder with subtle force. "We're so proud of you, Carmen." As I moved through the party, I kept my phone recording in my clutch purse, occasionally placing it near groups where Richard or my mother were speaking. I avoided all food and drinks, pretending to sip from glasses and discreetly discarding them, claiming stomach unease when pressed. At around 8 o'clock, I spotted a familiar face that filled me with hope. Sandra, the nurse, who had tried to warn me about my father's treatment years ago, was standing near the dessert table. I casually made my way toward her. "Happy birthday, Carmen," she said warmly when I approached. "You've grown into a beautiful young woman. Your father would be proud." "Thank you for coming," I replied, keeping my voice low. "I didn't see your name on the guest list." She smiled tightly. "I wasn't invited. I'm here as Dr. Patterson's +1. She glanced around before slipping a small USB drive into my hand. "The medication logs you asked about. I've been collecting them since your father died. Richard has been developing untraceable compounds that mimic natural diseases. I couldn't prove anything then, but I've been building a case." My heart raced as I tucked the drive into my bra. "Thank you. Did you ever find anything about a trust fund or insurance policy?" Sandra nodded slightly. "Your father changed his will 2 weeks before he got sick. Richard was the witness, but the changes seemed odd coming from Thomas. I made copies of everything." Before we could continue, Richard appeared beside us, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Sandra, what a surprise. I don't recall seeing your name on our guest list." "Last-minute addition," Sandra replied smoothly. "Dr. Patterson needed a date. Lovely party, Dr. Weber." As Sandra walked away, Richard turned to me, his voice dangerously soft. "Making new friends, Carmen? Or should I say reconnecting with old ones? I think it's time for our toast." "Okay, so..." He steered me toward the center of the garden where my mother was already arranging crystal flutes on a silver tray. I caught James's eye across the room and gave a subtle nod. He positioned himself closer, his phone discreetly recording. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced, his voice carrying across the now hushed crowd. "Today we celebrate Carmen's entry into adulthood. Diana and I couldn't be prouder of the young woman she's become." My mother began pouring champagne from a special bottle Richard had brought from home. I noticed she poured from a different bottle into 3 specific glasses that she set slightly apart from the others. "A special toast for the birthday girl and her parents," she explained to the server who was helping distribute the regular champagne to other guests. As everyone received their drinks, I positioned myself to observe my mother and Richard. They were speaking in hushed tones, unaware that James had moved close enough to capture their conversation. "Everything's set?" my mother asked, her voice barely audible. Richard nodded. "Perfect timing. 30 minutes after ingestion. They'll attribute it to a severe allergic reaction. The medical response team I arranged will handle everything appropriately." "And the trust fund transfers immediately." My mother's question sent ice through my veins. "As soon as she's declared. I've already prepared the paperwork for the medical examiner." Richard's casual tone while discussing my death made my skin crawl. My mother lifted the tray with our 3 special glasses, approaching me with a warm smile that now appeared ghoulish, given what I'd just overheard. "A special toast, darling. Just the 3 of us first, then everyone." I took my designated glass, noticing a faint bluish tint to the liquid that wasn't present in the regular champagne. As my mother turned briefly to answer a question from a guest, I executed the switch I had planned, exchanging my glass with hers in a smooth movement hidden by my body. Richard raised his glass. "To Carmen on her 18th birthday. May this be the beginning of a new chapter for our family." The crowd echoed the toast enthusiastically. I pretended to sip while watching my mother take a generous swallow from what she thought was her own glass. Richard drank from his seemingly confident in their plan. For several minutes, nothing happened as we continued to mingle. Then my mother touched her throat, a look of confusion crossing her face. "I feel strange," she murmured. Within minutes, she was having difficulty breathing. Richard rushed to her side as she collapsed, genuine panic in his eyes, as he realized something had gone terribly wrong. "She's having an allergic reaction," he announced, his medical training taking over. "I need my bag from the car." As someone ran to get Richard's medical bag, I stepped forward, my phone now visibly recording. "It's not an allergic reaction, is it, Richard? It's the same compound you used on my father, and Ashley's mother, and probably my grandmother too." Richard's head snapped up, his eyes locking with mine in shock. "What did you do?" he hissed. "I switched the glasses," I said, clearly loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "The special toast you prepared for me is what's affecting her now." The crowd fell silent as Richard's face contorted with rage. "You stupid girl, you have no idea what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied, pulling the USB drive from my dress. "I have your medication logs, the experimental compounds, the financial records, and I have this conversation recorded where you and my mother discussed my imminent death and the trust fund transfer." Richard lunged toward me, but James and several other guests moved to intercept him. In the confusion, Richard pulled something from his pocket, a syringe that he tried to jab toward me. "She needs to be sedated," he shouted desperately. "She's delusional," Dr. Patterson, who had come with. Sandra stepped forward. "Put that down, Weber. As a physician, I'm taking charge of this medical emergency until paramedics arrive." 2 security guards from the country club restrained Richard as my mother convulsed on the ground. Dr. Patterson was now attending to her, his expression grim. "Someone call the police," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Tell them to go to the Weber cabin in the Catskills. The address is 42 Pine Ridge Road. The safe code is 51203. Ashley Weber is either there or has evidence there." As chaos erupted around us, with guests calling 911 and Richard being restrained, Sandra put her arm around my shoulders. "Your father would be so proud of you, Carmen. You did what none of us could do. You found the truth." Police and paramedics arrived within minutes. My mother was stabilized and transported to the hospital. Richard was taken into custody based on the recording and Sandra's testimony about the medication logs. As an officer took my statement, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in 5 years, I could breathe freely. My 18th birthday party ended with police tape and flashing lights instead of cake and presents. But as I watched Richard being placed in a police car, I knew it was the best gift I could have received: justice for my father, and a chance at a future I had almost lost. The weeks following my dramatic birthday party unfolded like scenes from a crime thriller, except I was living each moment with a mixture of grief, vindication, and gradual healing. My mother survived the poisoning but suffered kidney damage that would require ongoing treatment. From her hospital bed under police questioning, she eventually confessed to her role in my father's death. The elaborate story spilled out in fragments their affair had begun 2 years before Dad got sick. Richard had convinced her that my father was planning to divorce her and leave her with nothing. The poison had been administered in small doses through my father's coffee, which only my mother prepared. "I never wanted to hurt you, Carmen," she said. During one of my brief visits to her hospital room tubes still connected to her arms. The birthday plan was all Richard's idea. He said we needed your trust fund to expand the clinic. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, now pale and diminished in her hospital gown, and felt nothing but a hollow sadness. "You watched Dad die slowly and did nothing. You are going to watch me die too." I didn't visit her again after that. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. The investigation expanded rapidly once police searched Richard's cabin in the Catskills. They found Ashley there, not held captive as I had feared, but hiding. She had discovered additional evidence in Richard's private safe, including detailed journals of the poisoning protocols used on my father and his first wife. "I couldn't risk coming to the party," Ashley explained when we were reunited at the police station. "But I knew if I could get the evidence from the cabin to the authorities while you gathered proof at the party, we'd have him trapped from both sides." The medical examiner ordered my father's body exhumed, and new toxicology tests confirmed what we had suspected: he had been poisoned with a complex compound developed in Richard's lab, designed to mimic an autoimmune response. Similar findings came from the re-examination of my grandmother's death and Richard's first wife, Dr. Levine became my advocate and legal guardian during the proceedings, helping me navigate the criminal investigation and media attention that followed. The story made national headlines prominent. Doctor murders, partner nearly kills stepdaughter for inheritance. The evidence was overwhelming. In addition to Ashley's and my testimony, Sandra provided years of meticulously kept records showing Richard's development of undetectable poisons. The recording from my birthday party captured Richard and my mother explicitly discussing my planned death. Financial records revealed the life insurance fraud and the trust fund that would have transferred to my mother upon my death. Richard and my mother both faced multiple charges, including first-degree murder, attempted murder conspiracy, and insurance fraud. Richard maintained his innocence, claiming I had fabricated evidence to frame him due to resentment over his marriage to my mother. Few believed him, especially after Ashley testified about the similar pattern with her own mother's death. As summer progressed, I worked with therapists to process the trauma of the past 5 years. The nightmares came frequently at first moments when I relived the fear of being hunted in my own home, the memory of my father's suffering, the horror of realizing how close I had come to becoming another victim. Recovery isn't linear. My therapist, Dr. Marine, reminded me during difficult sessions. You'll have setbacks, days when the pain feels fresh. That's normal after what you've endured. I moved in with my Aunt Catherine, my father's sister, who welcomed me with open arms and tearful apologies for not fighting harder to stay in my life after Richard pushed the family away. Her home became my sanctuary, filled with photos of my father and stories about his childhood that helped me reconnect with his memory. Catherine helped me establish the Thomas Marshall Foundation for Medical Ethics, using a portion of my trust fund to support oversight in experimental medicine and advocate for patients' rights. The foundation also funded scholarships for students pursuing careers in medical investigation and forensic pathology. Ashley and I remained close bound by our shared trauma and triumph. She moved to Boston to study psychology, determined to help others who had experienced family betrayal and abuse. We spoke weekly, comparing notes on our healing journeys and supporting each other through difficult court dates and media attention. In August, I received my official acceptance package from Columbia University. As I prepared for my freshman year, I chose to major in forensic medicine, inspired by the investigators who had helped bring my father's killers to justice. The science that had been used to take his life would now become my tool for protecting others. On the evening before I left for college, I visited my father's grave for the first time since his funeral. The cemetery was peaceful in the fading summer light, birds singing in the oak trees that reminded me of our fishing spot at Cedar Lake. I placed fresh flowers against his headstone and sat on the grass beside him. "I did it, Dad," I said softly. "I trusted my instincts just like you told me. I found the truth." The trial was still ongoing, but the prosecutors were confident in their case. Richard and my mother would likely spend the rest of their lives in prison. It wasn't a perfect ending, the kind where my father could somehow come back, or where I could reclaim the innocent years of my adolescence, but it was justice. And that had to be enough. As I sat there in the gentle September breeze, I realized the most profound lesson from my ordeal: some people would rather erase you than face what they did. The darkness in human hearts sometimes runs deeper than we can imagine. But equally powerful is our capacity for resilience, for seeking truth even when it's dangerous, for rebuilding life from the ashes of betrayal. I chose to focus on that second truth. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine to shape free from the shadows that had darkened the last 5 years of my life. When I finally stood to leave, I touched my father's headstone one last time. "I'm going to be okay, Dad, I promise." And for the first time since that terrible Tuesday morning, when he had collapsed in our kitchen, I truly believed it. Have you ever had to face a betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to move forward? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that survival is possible even after the deepest betrayals. Thank you for listening to my journey from darkness into light. Remember, the truth may be painful, but it always sets you free.